Imagine walking onto a plane, ticket in hand, confidence in your step only to be told that your seat doesn't belong to you. Not because you made a mistake, not because of your ticket class, but because of who you are. That's exactly what happened to Dr. Naomi Carter, a black woman, a powerful CEO, a symbol of success. In that moment, surrounded by strangers, whispers, and disbelief, she faced a choice that would define not just her flight, but her future. Would she explode in anger, proving every stereotype right, or would she stay calm and let her quiet strength do what anger never could? And here's the real question. If it were you standing there, humiliated in front of everyone, what would you do? Would you fight back, walk away, or, like Naomi, would you choose grace over rage? Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with words. They're fought in silence, in restraint, in the power to turn pain into purpose. This is not just a story about a flight. It's a story about dignity, courage, and the moment one woman's calm changed an entire company and inspired a nation. Stay with me, because what happens 5 minutes later will challenge everything you think you know about power, justice, and redemption. If this story already makes you feel something hit, like share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Let's begin. The soft hum of engines filled the gate at JFK International as passengers queued for Aurea Air Flight 217 to San Francisco. The morning light slanted through the tall windows, brushing against polished floors and the silver belly of the jet outside. Among the crowd, Naomi Carter moved quietly. She wore a plain charcoal blazer, a white cotton blouse, jeans, and sneakers that had carried her through years of airports. No designer purse, no jewelry except a simple watch with a cracked face. To anyone looking, she was just another traveler, perhaps, tired, maybe middle class. When the gate agent scanned her ticket, a green light flashed. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." Naomi smiled politely, thanked the woman, and stepped down the jet bridge. Inside, the first-class cabin gleamed under golden ambient lights, wide leather seats, crystal glasses, soft classical music whispering through hidden speakers. She paused, letting her eyes take in the quiet luxury. This was her company's pride, the face of Aurea Air, and today it was also her experiment. She moved toward seat 2A, near the window, but before she could set down her carry-on, a sharp voice sliced the calm. "Excuse me, ma'am, coach is back there." Naomi turned. A tall, impeccably dressed flight attendant blocked her way. Her name tag read Heather Moore, perfect blonde bun, pressed navy uniform, lips curved in a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Naomi's voice stayed gentle. "I believe this is my seat. 2A." Heather tilted her head, that smile hardening. "I'm sure there's been a mistake. We don't usually seat passengers dressed for economy up here." A couple of businessmen glanced up from their tablets. One of them chuckled softly. Naomi heard the whisper but kept her tone even. "Here's my ticket." She handed it over. Heather looked at the boarding pass, then back at Naomi. For a moment, something like irritation flickered across her face. Then, without a word, she tore the paper cleanly in two. The rip was loud in the quiet cabin. Naomi blinked. "Why would you do that?" Heather's voice was cool, "Because counterfeit tickets are a security issue. Ma'am, I'm saving you from further embarrassment." The torn halves drifted to the carpet. Passengers gasped. Someone muttered, "Whoa!" Naomi bent down, picked up the pieces carefully, straightened them on her palm. "This ticket was scanned at the gate. It's valid." Heather crossed her arms. "Then you won't mind waiting outside while we confirm. Security will escort you." Naomi's heartbeat quickened, but her voice stayed steady. "You could simply check your manifest." Heather's eyes narrowed. I said, "Wait outside," behind her. Another attendant appeared, Tyler Briggs, young, cocky, too eager to impress. "Problem, Heather. This lady insists she belongs in first class," Heather said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Tyler smirked. "Really, in jeans and sneakers." He turned toward Naomi. "Next time you play, pretend. At least rent the costume." A ripple of awkward laughter passed through the cabin. Naomi felt the sting, but didn't react. Years of boardrooms and backhanded comments had trained her for this. Inside, though, a familiar ache rose. The same ache she'd felt decades ago when her college professor asked if she was sure she belonged in an advanced engineering class. The same tone, the same disbelief that someone who looked like her could own a space like this. She took a breath, grounding herself. "Please," she said softly, "verify my name. Naomi Carter." Heather folded her arms tighter. "I don't need to. I can spot a fake story a mile away." Naomi studied her, the crisp uniform, the cold certainty, and felt something settle inside. Not anger, not yet. A quiet, heavy sadness. Tyler's voice rose again. "Ma'am, you're holding up boarding. Let's go." "Is there a supervisor?" Naomi asked. "I'm the supervisor," Heather snapped, "and I've made my decision." The hush that followed was almost physical. Naomi looked around. People averted their eyes, pretending to scroll their phones. No one wanted to be part of it. She straightened her back. "Then I'll wait here." Heather's tone sharpened. "Either you walk out, or security walks you out." At that moment, Naomi noticed a young woman standing behind them, petite, dark-haired, maybe 23, clutching a tablet too tightly. The trainee badge read Sophie Alvarez. Her face was pale, eyes wide. She looked from Heather to Naomi, lips parting as if to speak. Then she froze. Naomi met her gaze for a second, offering the faintest nod. It was enough to make the girl whisper, "I saw her ticket scan green. It's valid." Heather spun around. "Excuse me." Sophie swallowed hard. At the gate, it scanned green. The senior attendant's tone dropped to ice. "Sophie, step aside. Now." The girl hesitated, then backed away, her eyes flickering with guilt. Naomi felt the tension coil tighter around her chest. Every second stretched. The air smelled of citrus cleaner and fear. She thought of the hundreds of hours she'd spent designing this airline's customer care policy, the training modules on diversity, the speeches about respect. And yet here she stood, a stranger in her own creation. From somewhere down the aisle, a man's voice whispered, "Just let her sit down." Heather ignored him. "Security will handle this." Naomi turned her face toward the window. The sun caught the wing outside, gleaming like a blade. She whispered, mostly to herself, "All right, let's see what truth looks like today." She reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out her phone, and opened a contact labeled Elena Brooks, Chief Operations Officer. Her thumb hovered above the screen for a moment. Not yet, she thought. Let them show me who they are. Completely. The cabin door thudded shut. Somewhere behind her, the engines deepened in pitch. Passengers were silent now, sensing that something was wrong but unable or unwilling to stop it. Naomi sat down anyway. In the torn remains of her ticket, she saw the reflection of every quiet injustice she'd endured and overcome. She pressed the halves together, whispering a promise only she could hear. This ends today. Outside. A baggage truck rumbled past, shaking the floor beneath her feet. Inside, the stillness was louder than any noise, and so began the longest 5 minutes of her life. The hum of the airplane still lingered in the air, but inside Naomi Carter's mind, another sound echoed a low, familiar rhythm, the rhythm of her father's voice, the man who once told her, in every room, Naomi, there will be someone who looks at you and decides what you deserve. Don't ever let their decision be the final one. She had lived by that rule her entire life. When she was a child, growing up in a small neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, Georgia, airplanes used to slice across the sky every afternoon. She'd watch them from the cracked concrete porch of her grandmother's house, her hands greasy from helping her uncle fix old car engines. Every time a plane passed overhead, she'd whisper, "One day, I'll be up there." Her grandmother, a retired school teacher, would smile. "Then you better learn how to fly. Baby, don't wait for anyone to give you permission." Those words stayed with Naomi. By the time she was 28, she had become one of the youngest aerospace engineers at a major airline manufacturer. But it hadn't been easy. She still remembered the meeting where her design was dismissed before she even spoke. The project manager had looked her over and said, "We're looking for technical leads, not interns." She'd smiled back, placed her drawings on the table, and 15 minutes later, every engineer in the room had gone silent. Her design became the prototype that saved the company millions. That victory had not come from anger. It came from patience, from the kind of strength that never needs to shout to be heard. Years later, when she co-founded Aurea Air, she made a promise no passenger, no employee, no soul would ever feel small under her company's roof. She built the airline from the ground up, focusing on comfort, integrity, and equality. She created training programs, empathy workshops, and zero-tolerance policies, and yet, as the complaints began to rise, stories of rude attendance, discriminatory behavior, she felt a quiet panic. Maybe we've grown too fast. Her COO, Elena Brooks, had said just 2 weeks earlier in their Manhattan office. Naomi had stared out the window at the skyline, sipping her black coffee. "No, growth doesn't create prejudice, Elena. It just exposes what's been hiding." That was when she made her decision. She would see it herself. No boardrooms, no press releases, just her. A ticket. And the truth. Now, sitting in a first-class seat she had been told she didn't deserve. Naomi thought about that decision. She could still feel the sting of Heather's words, the sharpness, the certainty, the casual cruelty. It wasn't just about her. It was about every passenger who had written in saying, "They looked at me like I didn't belong." She looked down at the torn ticket in her lap, folded neatly now. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was proof. A soft chime sounded overhead. The flight attendants continued their pre-flight routine as if nothing had happened. Heather walked briskly down the aisle, her heels clicking against the floor, her posture stiff. Tyler followed behind, whispering something Naomi couldn't hear. In that moment, Naomi didn't see them as villains. She saw them as symptoms of habits, of culture, of blindness. She felt anger, yes, but deeper than that was disappointment. Across the aisle, a little boy peeked over the seat. He couldn't be more than 6. His mother whispered for him to turn around, but the boy grinned shyly. Naomi smiled back. The innocence in his eyes felt like a reminder of why she built this company in the first place. Outside the window, the crew loaded luggage under the wing. The sunlight bounced off the polished metal, reflecting across her face. She thought about how fragile control could be. One moment, you own a company. The next, someone's tearing your name apart without even knowing who you are. She took a slow breath, letting the air fill her chest. Then, a voice interrupted. "Ma'am, you're still here." It was Tyler again. Naomi looked up calmly. "I am. Just waiting for someone to check the manifest." He sighed dramatically. "Look, we're trying to take off. If you just step out for a minute." Her tone didn't change. "I've already boarded. I have a valid seat." I'll stay right here." Heather appeared again, her irritation barely disguised. "If you keep refusing instructions, I'll have to report you to the captain." "Do what you have to do," Naomi said quietly. Heather turned sharply and walked toward the cockpit. Tyler stayed behind, shaking his head, muttering something about entitled people. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. The sound of their footsteps faded, replaced by the soft murmur of passengers who didn't know where to look. She wondered how many of them would go home tonight and talk about this woman in jeans who caused a scene. Her phone buzzed gently in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. Elena again. The message read, "Everything okay. Board meeting in 10. Want me to call you?" And Naomi's thumb hovered over the reply. She typed slowly, "Not yet. Almost." Then she slipped the phone away. The door to the cockpit opened again. Captain Richard Hale stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, a pilot of 20 years with eyes that looked like they'd seen everything. His voice was steady but carried authority. "What's the situation?" "Heather, this passenger refuses to comply," she said quickly. "She's occupying a seat that isn't hers." Richard looked down at Naomi, assessing her with one quick sweep of his gaze. "Ticket." "She destroyed it," Naomi said softly. "You can check the system," Heather interjected. "The system might have glitched." "Captain, happens all the time." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Does it?" Richard exhaled. "Ma'am, let's not make this difficult. We can resolve it at the gate." For a second, Naomi almost laughed. Resolve it at the gate. That was always the phrase used to delay, to deflect, to deny. She looked at him steadily. "Captain, I'm not leaving this seat, but you're welcome to verify my name. Dr. Naomi Carter." Heather let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Doctor? Of what?" "Exactly." Naomi turned to her with calm precision. "Aerospace engineering." The silence that followed was thick. Richard frowned, as if trying to decide whether she was bluffing. "Dr. Carter, you say that's right." Before he could respond, a small sound came from behind a nervous cough, followed by a trembling voice. "She's telling the truth," said Sophie, the trainee. Her voice was soft but clear. Her name scanned on the manifest. "I saw it." Heather's jaw tightened. "Sophie." Not another word. But the girl's voice gained strength. "She's our passenger, and you tore her ticket." A few passengers nodded quietly. Someone pulled out their phone. The tension shifted. It wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was a moment being recorded. Naomi stayed still, breathing slowly. Inside, she felt the shift too. Something had changed. The silence had cracked. She looked toward Sophie, giving her a nod of gratitude. Then to Heather, whose face flushed red with anger. "If you have nothing to hide," Naomi said softly, "you shouldn't be afraid of a little truth." Heather opened her mouth, but Richard raised a hand. "That's enough. Everyone stay calm." Naomi leaned back in her seat. Calm was exactly what she planned to keep, because calm meant control, and control meant she could see what came next with absolute clarity. In her mind, she was already tracing the steps, the report she'd write, the training she'd redesign, the statement she'd give to her team when all of this was over. But for now, she waited, silent, observing, letting the weight of their choices settle in the air, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the calm and composure, a spark began to form. It wasn't rage, it was resolve, whatever came next. Naomi knew one thing: this would not end with humiliation, it would end with truth. The engines purred softly beneath the floor. First class had returned to its quiet hum, yet the silence felt strained, as if every breath inside that cabin waited for something to break. "Doctor..." Naomi Carter sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the torn ticket now tucked between her fingers. Across the aisle, a passenger tried pretending to read, but his eyes kept darting toward her. Another passenger whispered into her phone, voice hushed but urgent, like she was already sharing the story before it had even ended. Heather Moore walked briskly past Naomi again, pretending to check overhead compartments. Her polished shoes tapped the floor in steady rhythm, but her jaw was tight. Everyone could feel the tension between them, something invisible, yet sharp enough to cut through the recycled air. Naomi kept her gaze on the window. The world outside looked peaceful. A cloudless sky stretched beyond the glass, the early sunlight spilling across the wing. She thought how deceptive calm could be. Heather stopped at her seat. "Ma'am, the captain has made it clear. You need to disembark immediately." Naomi turned her head slowly, meeting her eyes. "I already told you. I'm not leaving. You can verify my name on the manifest." Heather's tone grew clipped, each word pressed through clenched teeth. "I don't need to verify anything. I can tell who belongs here and who doesn't." The words landed heavier than Heather probably realized. They filled the cabin like a shadow. Naomi saw the subtle reactions around her, the slight turn of a businessman's head, the frown from an older woman, the uncomfortable shifting of a young couple pretending to look away. Naomi took a breath. "You can tell," Heather crossed her arms. "I've worked first class for 11 years. I know what kind of passengers fly here." Naomi's voice stayed calm. "And what kind would that be?" Heather didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was enough. Naomi leaned back, her expression unreadable. "It must be exhausting," she said softly. Heather blinked. "Excuse me, carrying around all that certainty." Naomi replied, "It must get heavy after a while." Heather's lips pressed tight. "I don't appreciate your tone." "I'm sure you don't," Naomi said, "but I don't appreciate your assumptions either." Heather took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You think this is about race, don't you?" Naomi's tone remained steady. "I think this is about respect, something you seem to have misplaced." Before Heather could respond, Tyler Briggs appeared again, holding a tray of champagne flutes as if he were still auditioning for authority. "Everything okay here?" he asked, though his tone dripped with sarcasm. Heather gestured toward Naomi. "She refuses to comply. I've asked her repeatedly to step off." Tyler looked at Naomi, smirking. "Ma'am, this is first class. If you'd like a photo up here, I can take one before you leave." The remark drew a few uncomfortable laughs from nearby passengers. Naomi didn't react. She simply reached into her jacket, pulled out her ID, and set it on the tray in front of him. "You can check this." Tyler glanced down, not really looking. "Cute," he said, setting it aside. "Anyone can print a fake badge these days." Naomi's eyes met his. "You didn't even read it." He shrugged. "Don't need to." For a moment, the cabin felt smaller. The air seemed heavier. Naomi could hear the faint hum of electricity in the ceiling, the whisper of air conditioning through hidden vents. It was all too familiar, the same environment where prejudice often thrived. Polite, controlled, but unmistakably cruel. She remembered sitting in meetings where colleagues complimented her articulate speech as if they hadn't expected it. She remembered interviews where people said, "You don't look like a CEO," with a laugh meant to disguise insult as curiosity. And now, in a plane owned by her own company, she was living the same story again. Sophie Alvarez stood in the galley, clutching a stack of napkins she wasn't really folding. She wanted to speak up again, but fear crawled up her throat. The words caught there, unspoken. Her reflection in the polished metal door stared back at her, a reminder of everything she could lose. Naomi looked toward her, just a glance, but it was enough to remind Sophie that silence was also a choice. Heather, meanwhile, was still talking something about procedure and compliance, but Naomi barely heard her. Her focus was elsewhere, on the feeling that this moment mattered, that it wasn't just another story of mistreatment, it was evidence of a system that still didn't see. A soft cough interrupted the scene. A man seated 2 rows behind stood up, clearing his throat. He wore a gray suit, his hair silver at the temples. "Maybe she's right," he said hesitantly. "We all saw her board. Maybe her ticket's fine." Heather turned sharply. "Sir, please stay seated." "I'm just saying," the man replied. "If there's a chance you're wrong, shouldn't you check?" Heather's tone sharpened. "Sir, please don't interfere." He sat down slowly, but his words hung in the air like a spark that refused to fade. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You know, Ms. Moore, when I started my career, I used to believe the system worked, that if you followed every rule, did everything right, you'd be treated fairly. But then I realized it only works for the people the system was built to protect." Heather frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means fairness shouldn't depend on how someone looks walking down the aisle." For a brief moment, Heather faltered. Her eyes flicked toward Sophie, then toward Tyler, who shifted uneasily. The power she had drawn from their approval began to slip. She straightened. "Enough. I'll have security remove you." Naomi nodded. "You do that." Heather turned sharply and marched back toward the cockpit. Tyler followed, though he threw Naomi one last glare. The cabin buzzed quietly again, tension rippling through every row. Naomi exhaled, her heartbeat steady. She didn't want to fight. She wanted truth, and truth always showed itself when people thought no one important was watching. Her mind wandered briefly to Elena back in the office, to the stack of complaints on her desk, to the faces of passengers who had written heartfelt letters about being ignored, dismissed, humiliated. She had promised them change. Now, sitting here, she finally understood what that change had to look like. Through the small gap in the curtain, Naomi could see Heather talking to the captain, gesturing wildly. Tyler stood behind her, nodding. Sophie stayed by the door, frozen. Naomi closed her eyes, replaying every second of the encounter, her brain cataloging every word, every tone, every silence. Years of leadership had trained her to read people like open books. She saw fear, she saw arrogance, and underneath both, she saw ignorance, the most dangerous kind of all. A sound jolted her from thought. The cockpit door opened again. Captain Hale stepped out, face grim. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "we've decided it's best if you leave the aircraft. We'll rebook you on the next flight." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, her voice low but firm. "And if I don't, then we'll have security escort you," he replied. Heather stood behind him, triumphant. Tyler smirked. Sophie looked like she might cry. Naomi stood, smooth and calm, her posture unshaken. She looked at each of them, Heather's cold eyes, Tyler's smirk, Richard's rigid authority, and said quietly, "You're making a mistake." Richard's jaw tightened. "That's not for you to decide." Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "No," she said softly. "But soon, it will be." She sat back down, folding her arms, her face serene. Around her, whispers grew louder, phones lifted discreetly, cameras glowed red. The world was beginning to watch, and deep inside Naomi Carter, that spark she'd felt earlier caught fire. Not anger, clarity. She had come here to find the truth. Now the truth was revealing itself in real time. The captain's voice still lingered in the air, low and final. For a moment, no one moved. The cabin lights seemed too bright, the air too thin. Naomi Carter sat perfectly still. Her pulse was steady, but her thoughts moved fast. She had spent her entire life watching people in power misuse their authority. And now she was watching it happen again, 30,000 feet above the ground. Only this time, she wasn't powerless. Captain Richard Hale stepped closer. His posture was commanding, his tone all business. "Ma'am, I'm not going to repeat myself. We can handle this quietly, or we can handle it with security." Naomi's gaze lifted to meet his. "And what exactly is the issue?" "Captain?" He hesitated. It was a simple question, but it trapped him. Heather Moore shifted beside him, ready to fill the silence. "The issue," she said sharply, "is that you are in a seat you didn't pay for. You presented a fake ticket. That's fraud." Naomi's voice was soft. "Then check the system." Heather's lips thinned. "Our system doesn't make mistakes." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Neither did I." The captain sighed impatiently. "This conversation is over. Please gather your things." Across the aisle, a woman whispered, "She's so calm," to her husband, who muttered, "Yeah, but she's about to be thrown off." Naomi reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone again. She wasn't going to make a scene, but she was done being quiet. "Before you do that," she said, "I'd like you to contact your operations supervisor. They'll verify everything in less than a minute." Captain Hale frowned. "Ma'am, I'm not making calls because a passenger says so." Her tone stayed polite, but her words carried weight. "You're making a decision that could cost you your career. The least you can do is verify it." Heather folded her arms. "Are you threatening us?" Naomi looked at her evenly. "I'm reminding you that consequences exist for everyone." The silence after that was electric. The captain glanced at Heather, then back at Naomi. His authority, usually unquestioned, now trembled under the pressure of her poise. Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced down another message from Elena Brooks. "Everything okay? The board's asking for you." She typed a quick reply, "Not yet. Give me 5 minutes." When she looked up, Tyler Briggs had joined them again, clearly enjoying the drama. "Captain, if we don't remove her soon, we're going to miss our slot." Richard nodded. "Security. Now." Heather pressed the intercom, calling for ground support. Naomi leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. The hum of the engines vibrated through the floor. She remembered something her grandmother used to say: "The higher people think they are, the harder they fall when the truth shows up." The cabin door opened, and a woman in a Navy security uniform stepped inside. Her badge read Linda Parker. She looked composed, efficient, and utterly uninterested in nuance. "Problem here?" she asked. Heather stepped forward quickly. "Yes." "Passenger with a fake ticket, refusing to leave." Linda's eyes landed on Naomi. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to come with me." Naomi didn't move. "Before you do, Officer Parker, would you check my ID? I'll verify it after we're off the plane," Linda said curtly. "Then you'll be verifying it too late." Naomi replied. Linda's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, please don't make this harder." Naomi looked up at her, her expression calm. "Do you believe in fairness, officer?" The woman blinked. "I'm here to enforce the rules." "That's not what I asked," Naomi said quietly. Linda hesitated just long enough for the entire cabin to notice. Heather broke the silence. "This is ridiculous. Officer, she's wasting everyone's time." Naomi met Heather's stare. "Do you always assume what's easy is right?" Heather exhaled loudly. "Enough." Naomi sighed softly, almost sadly. "I built this airline to treat people with respect. I see now how far we've drifted." Heather frowned. Built this airline, Naomi didn't answer. Not yet. Linda stepped closer, holding out her hand. Ma'am, we need to go. Naomi stood slowly, gathering her bag, her movements deliberate. She turned toward the passengers watching her. Some looked embarrassed, some looked afraid, a few looked angry, though not at her. Before Naomi could move further, a small voice broke the tension. Wait, said Sophie Alvarez, her voice trembling but clear. She's telling the truth. Heather's head snapped around. Sophie, I saw her name on the manifest. Sophie said louder, It's real. Her seat is 2A. Heather's voice dropped to a hiss. That's enough. You're out of line. Sophie didn't back down this time. No, ma'am, you are. The words hit the cabin like a crack of thunder. Passengers started murmuring. A few clapped quietly. The man in the gray suit from earlier whispered. Finally, someone said it. Heather's face flushed. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Sophie. Yes, Sophie said softly. I'm doing my job. Naomi turned toward the young woman. Their eyes met, one filled with fear, the other with gratitude. Naomi smiled faintly. Thank you. Linda shifted uncomfortably. I need to confirm this with the captain. You do that, Naomi said. Heather turned on her heel, storming back to the cockpit. Tyler followed, muttering under his breath. The cabin buzzed like a hive. Someone whispered, Is she really the CEO? Another said, If she is, they're done for. Naomi sat again, her calm unbroken. She could feel the momentum shifting. Truth had a way of doing that slow at first, then unstoppable. Through the cockpit window, she saw Heather gesturing wildly, her hands slicing through the air. Richard looked uncertain now. Sophie stood nearby, wringing her hands but refusing to leave. Naomi took out her phone, scrolling to Elena's contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She hesitated for a moment, watching the reflection of her own face in the dark screen. She saw a woman who had fought for years to build something different. A woman who had believed that change could happen from the top down. And now, she realized, maybe it had to start from the ground up. The cockpit door opened again. Heather came out first, her face pale. Security will escort you out, she said, her voice shaky but still defiant. Naomi looked up. All right, she said softly, but before we do, let's make this official. She dialed Elena. The line clicked immediately. Elena, Naomi said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Call an emergency board meeting, now. Something's happened on Flight 217. The cabin fell silent. Heather blinked. What are you doing? Naomi didn't look at her. Telling the truth? Elena's voice came through the speaker, clear and composed. Understood. I'll alert the board. Naomi ended the call and placed the phone gently on the armrest. Heather tried to laugh. You think a phone call will change this? Naomi turned to her, her expression calm but cutting. It already has. Linda looked uncertain now. Ma'am, do I still... Wait, Naomi said. In about 5 minutes, everything will make sense. She leaned back in her seat again, eyes on the front of the cabin, her face unreadable. Outside, the engines began to hum louder, signaling takeoff soon. Inside, no one dared speak. The calm before the storm had settled over everyone. And somewhere between New York and the open sky, truth was preparing to take flight. The sound of the engines deepened. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, casting a soft amber glow across the polished seats. Every eye in first class was fixed on Dr. Naomi Carter. She sat perfectly still in seat 2A, her phone resting on her lap, her expression unreadable. The call she had just made hung in the air like electricity. Heather Moore stood near the cockpit door, arms crossed tight. Her face was pale, though she tried to look composed. Tyler Briggs shifted beside her, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Captain Richard Hale remained behind the closed door, probably hoping this would all disappear before takeoff. Sophie Alvarez lingered near the galley, one hand gripping the counter for balance. She had just defied her superior in front of passengers, and her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. But deep down, beneath the fear, there was relief. She knew she had done the right thing. Naomi leaned back in her seat. The steady hum of the engines was almost soothing. She stared out the window at the soft morning light. In her reflection, she saw a woman who had spent years building something from nothing, only to discover that ignorance could still board her planes wearing a perfect uniform. Her mind drifted to the people who made Aria Air possible, the mechanics working 12-hour shifts, the flight attendants who genuinely cared, the young girls who sent her letters saying they wanted to be pilots because of her. She owed them more than silence. Heather finally broke the stillness. "You can't just sit there pretending to be someone you're not," she said, her voice sharper than before. Naomi turned slowly. "And who do you think I am?" Heather's voice wavered slightly. Someone trying to make a scene? Maybe hoping to get a free ticket, a refund, attention, whatever it is people like you want. Naomi's tone stayed calm. "People like me." She let the words linger. "That's what you said." Heather swallowed but didn't answer. Naomi looked around at the watching passengers. Everyone here heard that. "People like me? I wonder what that means exactly." Heather's face flushed. "You're twisting my words." "No," Naomi said softly. "You meant them exactly the way they came out." The tension in the air tightened. A few passengers began recording on their phones. Naomi didn't mind. The truth needed witnesses. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Hale stepped out again. His expression was grim, his patience thin. "We're delaying departure because of this nonsense. Ms. Moore, what's the holdup?" Heather's voice was quick. "She refuses to leave. I've called security, but she's still here." Naomi spoke before he could respond. "Captain, before you make another mistake, I'd like you to check your flight manifest. Passenger list, seat 2A. Richard exhaled. "I already told you just check it," Naomi said, her tone calm but commanding. "Right now." He hesitated, then pulled out his tablet. He tapped the screen, scrolling through names. It took only a few seconds before his hand froze. Heather saw his face change. "What is it?" she asked, her voice uneasy. Richard didn't answer immediately. He looked at Naomi, eyes narrowing, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Naomi Carter. He read quietly. "Passenger, first class, seat 2A, ticket ID confirmed." The cabin erupted in whispers. Heather blinked rapidly. "That's not possible," Tyler muttered. "That can't be right." Sophie stepped closer, her voice shaking. "I told you it was valid." Naomi stayed still. "It's possible. It's always been possible. You just refuse to see it." Heather's voice faltered. Who are you?" Naomi's lips curved slightly. "You'll find out soon enough." Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down. Elena was calling back. Naomi answered and switched to speaker mode. Elena's voice was steady. "The board's online. Do you want me to patch them in?" Naomi looked around the cabin. "Yes, please." Heather's confusion deepened. "The board, what are you talking about?" Within seconds, a clear, professional voice came through the phone speaker. "Good morning, Dr. Carter. The board meeting is live. We understand you're on Flight 217. The words hit the room like a lightning bolt. Passengers gasped. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. Tyler's smirk vanished. Heather took a step back. Dr. Carter. Naomi nodded slowly. That's right. I'm Dr. Naomi Carter, co-founder and CEO of Aria Air, and you, Ms. Moore, have given me quite an education in how some of my employees treat our passengers. Heather's mouth opened, then closed again. She looked lost, like someone waking from a dream that had turned into a nightmare. Naomi stood. Her presence seemed to fill the cabin. I built this airline to stand for dignity and fairness. What I just witnessed was neither. You judged me the second I walked through that door. You humiliated me, tore my ticket, and threatened me, not because of policy, because of prejudice, Heather stammered. I didn't know who you were. Naomi's gaze hardened. You shouldn't have to. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the board member's voice came through the speaker again. Dr. Carter, do you want us to proceed with your directive? Naomi looked directly at Heather, then at Tyler. Her voice was calm, resolute. Yes. Effective immediately. Suspend the entire flight crew for misconduct pending formal review. Heather's face went white. You can't do that. Naomi met her eyes. I just did. Passengers began murmuring again. Some clapped quietly, others recorded every second. Sophie looked stunned but relieved. Captain Hale tried to speak. Dr. Carter, please understand. We were just following Naomi. Interrupted him gently. Following what? Captain orders or assumptions? He had no answer. Naomi turned to Sophie. Miss Alvarez? Sophie straightened instantly. Yes, ma'am. You stood up when it mattered, Naomi said. That's leadership. I won't forget it. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Dr. Carter. Naomi turned back to the passengers. I apologize to all of you for the delay and for what you've witnessed. This isn't the Aria Air I built, and it won't be the Aria Air you fly with again. The cabin filled with quiet applause. Some passengers nodded with respect. A few reached out to shake her hand as she passed. Heather stood frozen, her confidence shattered. I was just doing my job, she whispered. Naomi stopped, looking at her one last time. If your job requires you to strip someone of their dignity, then it's not a job worth keeping. She turned toward the window again. Outside, the sunlight glinted off the wing, bright and clean. Elena's voice came through the phone once more. Naomi, the media team is already getting wind of this. Do you want to make a statement? Naomi smiled faintly. No need. The truth is already speaking for itself. She ended the call and sat down again. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a quiet ache in her chest. She hadn't wanted this moment not like this, but maybe it was necessary. For a long time, she sat there, letting the silence settle again. Then she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. Maybe this is how change begins, one flight at a time. And as the engines roared to life once more, Naomi Carter closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. The noise was steady, grounding. It reminded her that power didn't come from titles or uniforms. It came from truth and the courage to speak it. No matter who was listening, 5 minutes. That's all it had taken for everything to change. The cabin was no longer the same. The air that once felt heavy with tension now carried a strange quiet, a silence that followed revelation. Dr. Naomi Carter sat back in seat 2A, her phone still resting on the armrest beside her. She could feel the eyes of every passenger on her, not with judgment anymore, but with something closer to awe. Heather Moore stood near the galley, pale and trembling. The authority she'd worn like armor had shattered the moment Naomi's identity was revealed. Tyler Briggs hovered behind her, unsure whether to speak or disappear. Captain Richard Hale stayed silent in the cockpit doorway, hands on his belt, watching his world shift in real time. Sophie Alvarez was the only one who moved. She quietly collected the half-empty glasses from the tray table in front of Naomi, her hands shaking just slightly. When Naomi met her eyes, the young woman gave a small, grateful smile. It was the kind of smile that said everything thank you. I was scared, but you gave me courage. Naomi smiled back. Are you okay? She asked softly. Sophie nodded. I think so. I just didn't think it would end like this. Naomi's voice was gentle. It hasn't ended yet. Outside the window, the light was shifting. The early morning haze had cleared, leaving the runway bathed in bright sunlight. The world outside was moving again, but inside that cabin, time seemed to have paused. Heather finally broke the stillness. Dr. Carter, please, let's be reasonable. I didn't mean any harm. Naomi turned toward her. You meant every word you said, Heather. Maybe not out of hate, but out of habit, and habits like that are harder to break than rules. Heather's lip trembled. I was just doing my job. Naomi's tone stayed calm. Then maybe it's time to redefine what your job really is. Heather didn't respond. She just stood there, shoulders sagging, as though her uniform had suddenly become too heavy to wear. The intercom crackled. The pilot's voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We'll be departing shortly after a brief delay. Thank you for your patience. It was almost absurd, that ordinary announcement after such extraordinary events. A few passengers chuckled quietly, breaking the tension. Others whispered among themselves, phones in hand, already sharing what they'd witnessed. Naomi took a sip of water, letting the sound of the captain's voice fade. Her heart was still steady, but her thoughts were racing. The video that had been recorded, she knew it was already out there. Someone had surely uploaded it by now. By the time they landed in San Francisco, this moment might already have gone viral, and she didn't know how she felt about that. She hadn't planned for it to happen this way. This trip was supposed to be an observation, not a spectacle. But maybe that was the only way change ever really started, with something uncomfortable enough that no one could ignore it. A soft knock came from the aisle. It was the businessman who had spoken up earlier, the man with the silver hair and calm voice. He smiled politely. Dr. Carter, if I may, I just wanted to say thank you for standing your ground. Naomi nodded. Thank you for speaking when others stayed quiet. He chuckled. I'm a lawyer. I know what fear of authority looks like. What you did, it took more restraint than most people realize. She smiled faintly. I've had practice. He nodded, understanding. You reminded everyone here what accountability looks like, and I think people needed to see that. Naomi looked down for a moment, her thumb brushing the edge of the folded ticket still on her lap. So did I. Heather was still by the galley, trying not to cry. Tyler stood behind her, pretending to check the cabinets. Naomi watched them quietly. For the first time, she didn't feel angry, just sad. She knew this wasn't just about two attendants. It was about the system that shaped them, the assumptions, the biases, the invisible rules that decided who was treated with kindness and who wasn't. She had helped build this airline. That meant part of this problem belonged to her, too. The intercom clicked again. Dr. Carter, said the captain's voice, hesitant now, almost nervous. If you're still on board, I'd like to apologize personally for what happened. The entire cabin turned toward the cockpit. Naomi's expression stayed composed. Thank you. Captain Hale, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Apology accepted. But I expect more than words. He didn't reply, but his silence said enough. Naomi glanced at Sophie, who was still standing nearby, waiting for instructions that never came. You can sit, Naomi said kindly. You've done enough today. Sophie nodded, cheeks flushed. I just didn't want to stay quiet." Naomi's eyes softened. That's how change starts. Someone deciding silence isn't safe anymore. A few passengers applauded softly. It wasn't loud, but it was genuine. The sound seemed to settle into the walls of the plane like a quiet affirmation. Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't answer. She already knew what Elena was calling about: press requests, social media, reporters waiting for a statement. All of it could wait. Right now, she just wanted to breathe. She thought about her mother, about how she used to remind Naomi that grace was a kind of strength, too. Never let their ignorance make you forget your dignity, her mother used to say. Naomi smiled faintly at the memory. She could almost hear that voice now. Heather finally gathered enough courage to speak again. "Dr. Carter," she said quietly, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm sorry." Naomi looked at her for a long moment. "Do you understand what you're sorry for?" Heather hesitated. For judging you?" Naomi shook her head gently. "Not just me. You judged everyone who doesn't fit your picture of what success looks like. That's not just unfair, it's dangerous." Heather nodded slowly. "I know. I'll do better." Naomi's voice softened. "Then start by listening, really listening, to the people who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, who make you uncomfortable. That's where understanding begins." Heather's eyes glistened. "I will." Naomi gave a small nod. Then maybe this flight wasn't wasted after all. For a moment, there was peace. The tension had finally melted away, replaced by something else, a fragile but real sense of awareness. Outside, the runway lights began to flicker as ground control signaled for takeoff. Inside, Naomi felt something shift within herself. She wasn't just a CEO handling a PR crisis. She was a woman watching her own vision being tested in real time, and somehow she still believed in it. As the engines roared, she closed her eyes briefly, whispering to herself, it had to happen this way. The plane began to move, slowly at first, then faster. The vibrations pulsed beneath her feet, steady and powerful. Around her, the passengers settled into their seats again. When the plane lifted off, Naomi opened her eyes. Through the window, the world fell away below a patchwork of clouds and light. Up here, it felt almost symbolic. She had always believed the flight represented freedom, but now she understood that freedom wasn't just about rising above. It was about refusing to bow down. She smiled quietly. The sky had listened today, and down below, she knew, the world was already starting to talk. By the time Aurea Air Flight 217 leveled off above the clouds, the story had already started to spread. None of the passengers knew it yet, but one short video, 38 seconds long, was climbing across social media faster than the plane itself. The caption read, "Black woman humiliated in first class, then reveals she's the CEO." Down in the cabin, the atmosphere had changed completely. The earlier tension had faded into a strange mix of reverence and disbelief. Every whisper carried the same question. Can you imagine being that calm doctor? Naomi Carter sat by the window, her eyes following the thin line of the horizon. The soft hum of the engines had become a kind of rhythm in her head. It was the sound of aftermath, the quiet that followed the storm. Sophie Alvarez walked down the aisle, offering water to the passengers. Her hands were still a little shaky, but her smile was real now. When she reached Naomi's row, she hesitated. "Dr. Carter," she said softly, "people are still talking about it. Everyone's saying it was powerful." Naomi looked up. It wasn't power, Sophie. It was a perspective. Sophie tilted her head, unsure. "What do you mean?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Power makes people listen to you. Perspective makes them understand you. One lasts longer than the other. The young woman nodded slowly, taking in the words like a lesson she didn't know she needed. "I'll remember that," she whispered. Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time, she checked it. Dozens of notifications lit up the screen messages from colleagues, journalists, and even her assistant back in New York. The top one was from Elena Brooks Naomi. The clip is everywhere. Millions of views already. Are you ready to talk to the press when you land? Naomi sighed quietly. The attention wasn't what she wanted, but maybe it was what was needed. Sometimes the only way to fix something broken was to shine a light on it, even if that light burned too bright. She opened a message from an unknown number. It was a photo her sitting calmly in seat 2A, her torn ticket on her lap, and Heather standing in front of her, mouth open mid-sentence. The caption someone had added read, "Grace under fire." Naomi turned off the phone and leaned her head back. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice again. "Baby, don't chase justice. Just walk in it." She smiled to herself. Maybe that was all she had done. Heather Moore sat a few rows away now, in an empty jump seat, staring at the floor. Her mind was a blur. Every second replayed in her head the way she'd spoken. The look in Naomi's eyes when she'd realized the truth. She wanted to vanish, but shame had a way of trapping people in place. Tyler Briggs sat next to her, his bravado gone. "We're done, aren't we?" he muttered. Heather didn't answer. She just whispered, "We did this to ourselves." Captain Richard Hale stayed silent in the cockpit, his hands on the controls though autopilot had taken over long ago. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment when he doubted Naomi without even realizing why. He'd always thought of himself as fair, reasonable, professional, but now he saw the cracks. Back in first class, Naomi's calm remained unbroken. She was thinking about what would happen next, the conversations waiting for her in San Francisco, the inevitable headlines, the company's statement, but more than that. She thought about meaning. Was justice still justice if it came through humiliation? Was change still pure if it started with shame? The man with silver hair spoke again from across the aisle. "Dr. Carter, if you ever decide to run for office, I'll vote for you." The line drew a laugh from several passengers. Naomi chuckled softly. "No politics for me. I have enough turbulence up here." The cabin relaxed. People began to smile again, the unease lifting like fog. Someone whispered, "She's amazing," and someone else replied, "She's exactly who we need right now." Naomi turned toward the window again, watching the sun climb higher. She thought about every woman who had ever been told she didn't belong, every young person who'd been talked down to, every quiet voice that had been dismissed. She wanted this story, her story, to mean something for them. The intercom crackled. It was the captain again, but this time his tone was different. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Before we begin service, I'd like to personally apologize to all of you for the earlier incident. We are committed to ensuring every passenger on Aria Air feels respected and valued." There was a pause. Then he added, "And, Dr. Carter, thank you for reminding us of that." A few passengers clapped softly. It wasn't the usual applause for a landing or a takeoff. It was quieter, heavier with meaning. Naomi nodded slightly toward the cockpit. She could sense that, at least for some of them, something had changed. Sophie leaned closer and whispered, "You changed the way I see things today." Naomi looked at her with a kind smile. "You did that yourself. Sophie, I just gave you a moment to prove it." The young attendant blushed, then turned to continue her service. Naomi took another breath, letting her shoulders drop. The world would be waiting when she landed. Reporters would call it a scandal, or a movement, or both. But to her, it was something simpler. It was a reminder that decency wasn't automatic, it had to be chosen. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Elena. CNN wants to interview you tonight. They're calling this the Flight 217 incident. Naomi typed a quick reply. Let them call it what they want. Just make sure they hear the message. She looked back out the window. The clouds below looked endless, soft like untouched snow. Up here, everything seemed peaceful, but she knew the turbulence of truth was just beginning. Heather finally approached her, slow, hesitant, like a student walking toward a teacher after failing a test. "Dr. Carter," she said quietly, "I know it doesn't change what I did, but I want to apologize again, not for your position, but for the person you are. I was wrong." Naomi studied her for a long time. "It takes courage to admit that," she said finally, "but don't let this apology be the end of it. Let it be the start of who you become next." Heather nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I will." Naomi reached out, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Then we both learned something today. For the rest of the flight, the cabin stayed calm. No raised voices, no tension, just quiet reflection." Somewhere behind Naomi, a passenger whispered, "I'll never forget this." When the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Naomi felt the change in pressure press gently against her chest. She watched the city appear below, bathed in golden morning light. As the wheels touched down, the cabin erupted into applause, not the usual kind, but something heartfelt, almost symbolic. Sophie's voice came through the intercom. "Welcome to San Francisco. On behalf of Aurea Air and Dr. Naomi Carter, we thank you for flying with us." Naomi smiled at the unexpected line. She hadn't asked for it, but she appreciated the gesture. As the passengers began to stand, some approached her quietly. A woman said, "My daughter wants to be a pilot. I'm going to tell her about you." A man added, "You made me realize how blind we can be." Naomi thanked them both, her smile warm but humble. This wasn't about her. It never had been. It was about the mirror she'd held up for everyone to see themselves more clearly. And as she stepped off the plane, the flash of cameras and the buzz of reporters waited just beyond the gate. The story had already taken flight. When the plane doors opened, the air that rushed in from the jet bridge felt different, thicker somehow, charged with the weight of everything that had happened 30,000 feet above. Dr. Naomi Carter adjusted her blazer, stepped forward, and was immediately met by a wave of flashing cameras. The terminal buzzed like a hive. Reporters from every major outlet were there, voices overlapping in a storm of questions. "Dr. Carter, can you confirm what happened on Flight 217? Were you discriminated against? Will there be terminations? Is Aurea Air planning to issue a statement?" Naomi didn't answer. Not yet. She walked calmly through the crowd, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Her assistant, Elena Brooks, appeared through the chaos, phone in hand, earpiece still attached. "Naomi," Elena said in a low voice, stepping beside her, "the video has over 20 million views. Every outlet wants your comment. CNN, the New York Times, everyone." Naomi exhaled slowly. "Let's not rush into talking. Let's make sure we're saying something worth hearing." Elena nodded. "We already suspended the flight crew as per your directive. HR is drafting statements, but they're waiting for your approval." Naomi stopped walking for a moment. Through the glass windows of the terminal, the morning light poured in bright and golden. "Elena, this isn't just about one flight. We can't treat it like an isolated incident. We have to address the culture that allowed it to happen." Elena gave a knowing look. "You want a full audit?" "Not just that," Naomi replied quietly. I want reform from hiring to leadership training, every level. They resumed walking. Behind them, passengers from Flight 217 were still being interviewed, their faces animated as they recounted what they'd witnessed. Some described the arrogance of the crew. Others spoke of Naomi's calmness, the way she handled everything without shouting or humiliation. She didn't even raise her voice. One man told a reporter, she just made them see themselves. By the time Naomi and Elena reached the VIP exit, her phone was vibrating nonstop. The world was watching, and she could feel it. As they stepped into the car waiting outside, Naomi finally allowed herself a breath. The doors closed, and the noise of the terminal faded away, replaced by the soft hum of the city outside. Elena looked at her. "Are you all right?" Naomi gazed out the window. "I'm fine. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how the same sky can look different, depending on where you're standing." Elena smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you'll say in your interview." Naomi turned her head. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for one. I don't want this to turn into another social media spectacle. People will move on in a week unless we give them something lasting to hold on to." Elena nodded. "Then let's give them something lasting." The car pulled onto the freeway toward downtown San Francisco. Outside, the skyline glistened against the bay, a picture of modern ambition. But inside the car, silence lingered, a silence full of reflection. Naomi's thoughts drifted back to Heather Moore, sitting pale and broken in that jump seat, to Sophie Alvarez, trembling but brave, to the passengers who had watched, filmed, judged, and learned. 20 million views. That number didn't impress her. What mattered was whether those millions saw themselves in that moment, whether they questioned what they would have done in Heather's place or in hers. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her mother. "Proud of you, baby, but don't forget to rest." Naomi smiled softly. Even now, her mother's wisdom grounded her. Don't forget to rest. She'd always been told that fighting the world could wear you down faster than flying through it. They arrived at Aria Air's headquarters less than an hour later, a sleek building of glass and steel overlooking the harbor. As she stepped inside, employees turned to look. Some smiled shyly, others clapped quietly. Naomi acknowledged them with a nod. "Thank you," she said simply. "Let's get to work." In the boardroom, the atmosphere was solemn. A dozen executives waited, faces serious. Michael Harrington, the chairman, stood to greet her. "Naomi, the footage has become international news. We've reviewed the video. It's clear the crew acted inappropriately. But the question now is, how do we move forward?" Naomi took her seat at the head of the table. Her voice was calm but firm. "We don't hide. We don't spin this. We own it." The room went silent. She continued, "This isn't about saving face. It's about saving integrity. We built Aria Air on the promise of inclusivity, of treating every person with respect. Somewhere along the line, that promise was broken. I intend to rebuild it." One of the board members, a middle-aged man with silver-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "Dr. Carter, public perception is volatile. If we don't manage the narrative carefully, we could suffer significant losses." Naomi met his gaze. "If we manage the truth carefully, we've already lost." Elena watched her, pride in her eyes. Naomi had always led with conviction, but today her words carried something deeper, resolve sharpened by disappointment. She stood, pacing slowly. "I want to create a new training division focused solely on ethics and empathy, not the checkbox kind, real uncomfortable conversations about bias and privilege. If we're going to be an airline that represents the skies, we have to represent everyone under them." There were murmurs of agreement around the table, and I'll personally lead the first session. Naomi added. Not as CEO, but as someone who still believes in the promise we made. After a long pause, Michael nodded. Then it's settled. We'll support you fully. Naomi smiled faintly. Good, because this is only the beginning. When the meeting ended, she walked alone to her office. Through the tall windows, the bay stretched endlessly, shimmering under the afternoon sun. Boats moved slowly across the water, their white wakes tracing paths that vanished quickly, like the moments people remembered before they chose to forget. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. A headline flashed across the newsfeed: Flight 217, a lesson in leadership and humanity. She clicked it open and read quietly. The article praised her composure, her grace under pressure, but she paused at one line near the end. Perhaps the real story isn't about a CEO being discriminated against. It's about who we become when we realize we've done the same to others. Naomi closed her eyes, letting the words settle. They were right. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sophie Alvarez stepped in hesitantly, still in uniform. Dr. Carter, she said, almost whispering, I wanted to thank you again for believing me, for letting me be brave. Naomi smiled warmly. You didn't need my permission to be brave. Sophie, you already were. The young woman's eyes glistened. I just wanted to say, I'll do better. For you, for everyone. Naomi stood and crossed the room. Do it for yourself, she said gently. That's how you make it real. As Sophie left, Naomi turned back toward the window. The city below was alive, vibrant, unpredictable. She thought about the millions of people scrolling through that video, some angry, some inspired, some simply watching. Maybe that was how change started in the modern world, not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in pixels and screens and conversations whispered between strangers and hearts quietly shifting toward empathy. The sun dipped lower over the bay, spilling gold across the office floor. Naomi whispered to herself, this isn't just my story anymore, it's everyone's, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to exhale fully, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but as a woman finally at peace with speaking her truth. That night, the city of San Francisco was glowing. The skyline shimmered with thousands of lights reflected across the bay. But inside Aria Air headquarters, only one office still burned brightly. Dr. Naomi Carter sat by the window, her reflection merging with the glass and the city beyond. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of her laptop and the rhythmic ticking of a small brass clock. The world had not stopped talking. The story of Flight 217 had crossed borders, languages, and time zones. Hashtags like On Flight 217, Naomi Carter, and Justice in the Sky trended on every platform. News anchors called it a defining moment for corporate accountability. Commentators debated whether Naomi had been too firm or not firm enough, but through all the noise, one truth rang clear: she had handled it with grace. Elena Brooks entered the office, balancing 2 mugs of coffee. You've been here for 8 hours, she said gently. You should go home. Naomi smiled faintly without looking up. I just need to finish this statement. Elena set a mug beside her. The world already heard your statement on that plane. This one's different, Naomi said, still typing. The first one was about justice. This one needs to be about responsibility. Elena took a seat across from her. Responsibility. Naomi looked up, eyes thoughtful. When I saw Heather and Tyler standing there, I realized something. They didn't invent that bias. They inherited it from the world, from the systems around them, maybe even from us. So if I punish them without fixing the cause, I'm just rearranging the problem. Elena nodded slowly. You're thinking long-term again. That's the only way I know how to think. Naomi replied softly, She saved the document and turned the screen toward Elena. "Here, read this." Elena began to read aloud. Aria Air recognizes that equality isn't a slogan, it's a practice. What happened on Flight 217 isn't a scandal, it's a wake-up call. We will use this moment not to defend our name, but to redefine it. She stopped, looking at Naomi. "You wrote this in 2 hours." Naomi smiled gently. Pain has a way of speeding up clarity. Elena sighed. "You realize this will make headlines again. People will quote every word." "Then let them," Naomi said. "At least they'll be quoting something honest." Her phone buzzed again, vibrating against the desk. A message from Sophie Alvarez appeared. "Dr. Carter, I watched your press conference. Thank you for everything. I hope I can live up to the trust you placed in me." Naomi typed a short reply. "You already have. Keep flying high, Sophie." She leaned back, exhaustion beginning to settle into her bones. The day had felt like a lifetime. Yet, beneath the fatigue, she sensed something else, a quiet conviction, the kind that comes only after standing through a storm and realizing you're still upright. Elena checked her watch. The morning shows have requested interviews. CNN, Good Morning America, BBC World. They all want you live. Naomi chuckled softly. "It's ironic. I spent years trying to build an airline that didn't need my face to prove its values. Now the face of the company is a woman who got told she didn't belong in first class." Elena leaned forward. "That's exactly why they're listening. Because they saw it happen. They saw how you handled it." Naomi gazed out the window again. "Do you ever think the world changes only when people can't look away anymore?" Elena thought for a moment. "Maybe. But sometimes one person has to give them something worth looking at." Naomi nodded, her expression distant. "Maybe this is my turn." The city lights flickered against the glass, blurring like reflections on water. Naomi thought about her younger self, the girl who had sat in airport terminals, watching planes take off and promising herself that one day she'd be inside one of them, not cleaning up after others, but leading them. She had made it, but now that achievement felt smaller compared to the responsibility of what came next. Her laptop pinged again, an email alert. The subject line read, "Letter from Passenger 14B." Curious, she opened it. The message began, "Dr. Carter, I was on Flight 2117. I wasn't one of the people who spoke up. I watched, I recorded, I hesitated. I've been thinking about why I stayed silent. I realized it wasn't fear, it was habit. You broke that habit for me. From now on, I'll speak when it matters." Naomi's eyes lingered on the words. Then she whispered, "That's why it was worth it." Elena noticed the softness in her voice. "Good news." Naomi turned the screen so she could see, better than any headline. They sat in silence for a while, both of them looking out at the glittering city. Finally, Elena spoke. "Do you think Heather and the others will recover from this?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Eventually, if they're willing to learn. Sometimes humiliation is the first step toward humility." Elena smiled faintly. "That's very poetic." Naomi's tone was calm. "It's just true." The clock struck midnight. Naomi closed her laptop, finally allowing herself to stop. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start again." Elena stood and gathered her things. "Tomorrow," she echoed. Before leaving, she paused at the door. "Naomi, for what it's worth, I'm proud to work for you." Naomi's eyes softened. "I'm proud we work for the same reason." When the door closed, the office felt still again. Naomi walked to the window and placed her palm against the cool glass. The lights of the city stretched far beyond what she could see like possibilities, infinite and waiting. Her reflection stared back at her strong, steady, and tired, but unbroken. She whispered to it, "You did what you had to do." Outside, a plane passed overhead, its red lights blinking against the dark sky. She watched it climb until it disappeared into the clouds, and, for the first time since the incident, Naomi allowed herself to breathe freely. The kind of breath that comes not from relief, but from release. Somewhere out there, a passenger from Flight 217 was probably watching that viral video again. Maybe sharing it with friends, maybe thinking a little deeper about what respect truly meant. That was enough. The world had seen injustice and dignity collide in real time, and dignity had won. Naomi turned off the lights, leaving only the view of the bay to illuminate her office. Tomorrow would bring questions, meetings, maybe backlash, but tonight she had peace, because the sky had listened and the world had answered. Morning sunlight spilled across the San Francisco Bay, casting long golden streaks through the glass walls of Aria Air headquarters. The building stood tall against the skyline, polished and calm on the outside, though inside, conversations about Flight 217 were still echoing through every hallway. "Doctor." Naomi Carter walked through the lobby, her steps quiet, her posture poised. She had slept only 3 hours, but her mind was already in motion. As she passed the reception area, employees greeted her softly, some with admiration, others with quiet curiosity. Naomi responded to each with a nod and a smile. She understood what their eyes were asking. What happens now? The elevator chimed softly as she reached the top floor. Elena Brooks was already waiting by the conference room with a stack of papers. Her expression was focused but tired, the same exhaustion that comes from fighting battles of both logistics and conscience. "Morning," Elena said. Naomi smiled faintly. "Barely." Elena handed her a folder, media requests, partnership statements, and internal feedback from the crew members we interviewed last night. Naomi opened the folder and scanned the pages. The first report listed hundreds of employee emails, apologies, reflections, and a few uncomfortable truths. One line stood out to her. "I didn't realize how many small things I've ignored until I watched that video." She looked up. "People are starting to see it." Elena nodded. "You've given them something to think about." Naomi exhaled slowly. "Now we need to give them something to do." Inside the conference room, the board had gathered again. Michael Harrington sat at the head of the long oak table, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. Around him were department heads, PR consultants, and HR directors, all waiting for Naomi. When she entered, the room quieted instantly. She set down her folder and looked around. "Good morning, everyone. Let's get to it." Michael leaned forward. "Naomi, the company's image has taken a hit. We've lost several major investors in the last 24 hours. They're afraid of long-term damage." Naomi met his eyes. "We didn't lose investors. We lost people who were comfortable with silence. I can live with that." A few heads turned, unsure if it was defiance or clarity they heard in her voice. She continued. "Flight 217 isn't a PR crisis, it's a cultural one, and we're not going to fix culture with press releases." The head of public relations, a woman named Claire, cleared her throat. "Dr. Carter, public sentiment is strong right now, but it could turn if people think this is performative. We need tangible proof of change." Naomi nodded. "You're absolutely right. That's why we're launching Project Horizon." The room exchanged glances. Elena took over, sliding documents across the table. Project Horizon will include a new inclusivity training division, leadership accountability programs, and a mentorship track for underrepresented employees. Every level of management, from pilots to executives, will be required to participate. Claire looked impressed. And how public will this be? Naomi smiled slightly, transparent enough that no one can accuse us of hiding behind our own reputation. Michael leaned back, arms crossed. You're asking for a massive budget increase? Naomi didn't hesitate. Then call it an investment, because ignorance costs more in the long run. A brief silence fell over the room before Michael nodded. Approved. Naomi smiled. Good. Then let's start with me. Every face turned toward her. She said calmly, if I expect others to face their blind spots, I'll face mine too. I'll go through the same program, every session, every module, no exceptions. There was a flicker of respect in the room. For the first time, Naomi saw something different in their eyes, not fear of leadership, but belief in it. After the meeting, Elena followed Naomi into her office. You realize you just volunteered for weeks of grueling workshops, right? Naomi chuckled softly. You think I haven't lived them already? Elena smiled. Fair point. Naomi poured herself a glass of water. Elena, what if this really works? Not just for us, but for other companies watching. Elena tilted her head. You think it could start something bigger? Naomi looked out the window. If it doesn't, then what's the point of surviving storms if we don't learn to build better shelters? Her phone buzzed. Another notification, this time from a talk show host requesting an exclusive interview. The message read, we want to talk about leadership under fire. Naomi thought for a moment, then smiled. Schedule it, but not to talk about me. I want to talk about Sophie. Elena blinked. Sophie Alvarez. Yes, Naomi said. The girl who stood up when it was hard. She's the story people need to hear now. A few hours later, Naomi found herself in the staff lounge where Sophie was sitting alone with a cup of coffee. The young attendant looked startled to see her. Dr. Carter, she said, quickly standing up. Naomi motioned for her to sit. Relax. Sophie, you're not in trouble. Sophie smiled nervously. I still can't believe all this is happening. My mom called me crying last night. She said she was proud of me for the first time in years. Naomi's expression softened. She should be. You showed more courage in one moment than some people show in a lifetime. Sophie blushed, looking down. I didn't think it was courage. I just thought it was wrong. Naomi nodded. That's how courage always starts. They sat together for a while, sipping coffee in silence. Finally, Naomi said, I want you to join me on a televised interview tomorrow. Sophie's eyes widened. Me, I don't know what to say. Say what you felt, Naomi replied gently. Say what made you speak up. People need to hear it. Sophie hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll try. Naomi smiled. That's all I ask. Later that evening, Naomi returned to her office once more. The sun was setting, the sky painted in streaks of orange and violet. She leaned against the glass and watched planes ascending into the distance, one after another, each carrying stories she would never know. Her reflection in the glass looked tired but purposeful. She whispered softly to herself. Maybe this is what change really looks like, not loud, but steady. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Heather Moore. Naomi hesitated before opening it. The text read, Dr. Carter, I've been attending counseling and sensitivity training since the incident. I know I failed, but I want to thank you for not destroying me when you could have. You showed me mercy, and that changed me more than punishment ever could. Naomi read the words twice. Her eyes softened, her lips curving into a small, bittersweet smile. She replied simply, Growth is the best apology. Keep going. As the night settled in, she turned off the lights and let the darkness fill the room. Outside, Another plane climbed into the night sky, its lights blinking steadily against the horizon. Naomi followed it with her eyes until it vanished beyond the clouds. Somewhere up there, someone was learning what she already knew, that sometimes the highest altitude comes from humility. The next morning, the sun poured gently through the large studio windows of the NBC News building in San Francisco. Technicians moved around briskly, checking microphones, adjusting lights, and setting up the sleek black chairs in the center of the stage. The atmosphere was electric, yet calm, the kind of anticipation that only came before a story the world was waiting to hear. Dr. Naomi Carter sat quietly in the green room, her posture relaxed but her mind alert. She wore a simple navy suit, elegant but understated. Across from her sat Sophie Alvarez, nervous fingers fidgeting with her earpiece. Naomi smiled reassuringly. "You'll be fine. Sophie, just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." Sophie took a deep breath. "I still can't believe they want me on national television." Naomi chuckled softly. "Neither could I. The first time they called me for an interview years ago, I told myself, you're not here to perform, you're here to show up." Sophie smiled nervously. "Show up? Got it." Elena Brooks entered the room, holding a clipboard and her phone. "They're ready for you both in 2 minutes. Naomi." The host wants to start with a question about Flight 217, but they'll pivot quickly to Oria Air's new reforms. Naomi nodded. "Good. Let's make this about what comes next, not what went wrong." Elena gave a small smile. "You always manage to turn storms into blue skies." Naomi laughed lightly, or at least clearer skies. When they stepped onto the set, the host, an older man named Thomas Reed, greeted them warmly. His voice was deep and steady, the kind that carried the weight of decades in journalism. "Dr. Carter, Sophie, thank you both for being here," he said. "Thank you for having us." Naomi replied with her calm, practiced grace. Sophie echoed softly, "Thank you." The interview began with clips of the viral video playing on the screen behind them, the confrontation, the calmness, the moment of revelation. The footage still carried emotional weight. Even the crew watching seemed moved, though they must have seen it dozens of times by now. Thomas leaned forward. "Dr. Carter, you've been praised for your composure during what many are calling one of the most public incidents of discrimination caught on video this year. How did you stay so calm?" Naomi paused, then answered thoughtfully, "I've spent my life learning that anger doesn't always open doors, but dignity can. I stayed calm because I wanted them to hear me, not fear me." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's powerful. And Sophie, you were the flight attendant who stepped in to defend Dr. Carter. Tell us what was going through your mind at that moment." Sophie swallowed hard, glancing at Naomi before answering. "I was scared. Honestly, I was terrified. But I saw something that felt wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't about who she was, it was about what was right." Her voice trembled slightly, but it was sincere, pure. Naomi placed a gentle hand over hers, steadying her. Thomas smiled. "That's remarkable. And Dr. Carter, what happened after the plane landed was just as extraordinary. You addressed the incident not with outrage, but with reform. Can you tell us about that?" Naomi leaned forward, her voice calm but resolute. "When something like this happens, it's easy to blame individuals, but that only scratches the surface. The real question is, what systems, what habits, what silences made it possible? That's what Project Horizon is about, breaking the silence, one conversation at a time." Thomas's eyes glimmered with respect. "Some are calling you the Rosa Parks of corporate America. How do you feel about that comparison?" Naomi smiled softly. Rosa Parks changed history by refusing to give up her seat. I simply refuse to give up my dignity. I don't deserve that comparison, but I'm grateful if this moment reminds people that equality isn't finished work, it's ongoing. There was a brief pause as her words sank in. Then Thomas turned to Sophie again. Sophie, I heard you've been promoted since the incident. Sophie's cheeks flushed. Yes, I'm now part of the training team for new attendants. Dr. Carter insisted on it. She said courage should be contagious. Naomi smiled proudly. And it has been. Sophie's courage inspired hundreds of employees to speak up. That's leadership. Thomas leaned back. Dr. Carter, millions have seen that clip. What do you hope they take away from it? Naomi looked straight into the camera. I hope they remember that power isn't what you hold over others. It's how you choose to use it for them. If watching me sit in that seat makes someone think twice before judging another person, then it was worth every second. The studio was silent for a moment, one of those silences that feels sacred. When the interview wrapped, the crew applauded quietly. Sophie looked overwhelmed, eyes shimmering. Naomi squeezed her hand gently. You did beautifully. Outside the studio, a small crowd had gathered, holding signs that read, We stand with Naomi and fly with dignity. Some called her name as she walked out, but she didn't bask in it. She smiled kindly, waved once, and kept walking. Elena caught up beside her. That interview's already trending, she said, glancing at her phone. Every major outlet's quoting your line about dignity. Naomi chuckled softly. It's funny. People think dignity is rare. It's not, it's just quiet. They walked toward the car, waiting at the curb. Sophie followed a few steps behind, still trying to process everything. When they got in, Naomi looked at her reflection in the tinted window. You know, Elena, when I was younger, I used to dream about being seen. Now I realize, being seen isn't the goal. Being understood is. Elena smiled. And today, people understood. Sophie spoke up from the back seat. Dr. Carter, do you think people will actually change? Naomi turned slightly to face her. Change isn't instant. Sophie, it's slow, uncomfortable, and sometimes invisible. But yes, if even one person decides to treat someone better tomorrow, that's change. As they drove through the city, Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Heather Moore. I watched your interview. Thank you for letting the world see grace instead of revenge. I'm learning. Naomi typed back simply, That's what grace is for. She put her phone away and leaned back, her thoughts quiet. The sky outside was streaked with orange and pink, the kind of light that made everything seem possible again. When they reached the office, several employees were waiting by the entrance, clapping as she stepped out. Someone said softly, You made us proud. Dr. Carter. Naomi smiled, genuine and humble. You make me proud every day. Later that evening, she sat alone in her office, watching the replay of the interview. She studied Sophie's nervous hands, her own calm expression, the sincerity that had filled every word. For the first time since that day on the plane, she felt something deep and steady inside her peace. The storm had turned into a story. The story had turned into movement, and the movement was no longer hers alone. She closed the laptop, whispering to herself, This is how flight really begins. 2 weeks had passed since the interview aired, but the world hadn't stopped talking. What began as a viral video had become something much larger, a cultural conversation about respect, leadership, and accountability. Across newsrooms, offices, and classrooms, people were still asking the same question. What would I have done on Flight 217 at ARIA Air Headquarters? The rhythm of work had returned, but everything felt different. The company's walls seemed brighter, the conversations lighter, yet deeper. Posters with new core values, respect, courage, integrity had been placed in every hallway. Project Horizon was already underway, and the results were starting to show. Dr. Naomi Carter stood in front of a large window overlooking the bay, watching the morning light dance across the water. Helena Brooks entered with her tablet, as usual, but this time her expression carried something softer than stress, something close to pride. "Morning. Naomi," she said, setting the tablet on the desk. "You'll want to see this." Naomi turned, smiling. "More press requests?" Elena shook her head. "Better. Flight 319 from Dallas just landed. It was the first route fully operated under Horizon training. 0 complaints. Passenger satisfaction up 20%. One even wrote that the flight felt different, like people cared again." Naomi's smile widened. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Elena leaned against the desk. "You've started something big here. Naomi, other airlines are calling, asking for copies of our training modules." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Sharing our work?" Elena shrugged. "You said it yourself. Change isn't about ownership, it's about impact." Naomi nodded slowly. "You've been listening." Elena grinned. "I've had a good teacher." Before Naomi could respond, her phone buzzed. The caller ID read Sophie Alvarez. Naomi answered immediately. "Sophie, how's Denver treating you on the other end?" Sophie's voice was bright with excitement. "Dr. Carter, I just finished my first session leading the new crew training. It was amazing." Some of the attendants cried. One of them said it was the first time she felt seen in this job. Naomi smiled. "That's the whole point. Sophie, you're building something real." Sophie hesitated. "I wouldn't have had the courage without you." Naomi's tone was gentle. "You already had it. I just reminded you where it was." As they hung up, Naomi stood by the window for a long moment. The view outside was familiar planes taking off, their wings glinting in the sunlight, but today it meant something more. Every takeoff was a story, every landing a lesson. Later that afternoon, Naomi hosted a staff town hall meeting in the main auditorium. Hundreds of employees filled the seats, their faces eager, hopeful. When she walked on stage, the room fell quiet, not out of obligation, but respect. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and steady. "2 weeks ago, our company faced a storm. It wasn't the kind that shakes airplanes, it was the kind that shakes people, and we had a choice to cover it up or to confront it. We chose the harder path." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I want to tell you what I've learned. When dignity is denied, silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. But when courage speaks, even softly, it can rewrite everything." The audience listened intently. Some took notes, others simply stared, caught in her quiet conviction. Naomi continued, "This is no longer about Flight 217. It's about every gate, every crew, every passenger, about how we treat each other when no one's recording. Because the real test of character isn't in crisis, it's in consistency." Applause rippled through the room, growing louder until it filled the space like thunder. Elena, standing off to the side, wiped a tear discreetly. She had seen Naomi lead boardrooms and handle crises. But this was different. This was leadership from the heart. After the meeting, employees gathered around Naomi, thanking her, sharing their own stories. One mechanic spoke up shyly. "Dr. Carter, my daughter saw the video. She said she wants to be a pilot now. She said, if she can fly through that, I can too." Naomi smiled warmly. "Tell her she's already cleared for takeoff." That night, as the office lights dimmed and the city glowed beyond the glass walls, Naomi stayed behind, reading through letters that had arrived from all over the country, letters from passengers, employees, even children. One caught her attention. It was handwritten, the paper slightly smudged with ink. Dear Dr. Carter, my name is Aaliyah. I'm 12 years old. I saw your video in class. I used to think being different was something to hide, but now I think it's what makes me special. Thank you for showing me that people like us can belong anywhere, even in first class. Naomi felt her throat tighten. She held the letter to her chest for a moment before placing it carefully in her drawer. Elena walked in quietly. You're still here, Naomi smiled. Just catching up on hope. Elena chuckled softly. That's a good kind of paperwork. They stood together by the window. The city lights stretched endlessly, reflecting on the glass. Elena turned to her. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day? Naomi nodded slowly. All the time, and every time, I realized silence would have cost more than the truth ever could. Elena took a deep breath. The world's still learning from you, Naomi. Naomi looked out at the dark horizon, a single plane cutting across the sky. Then maybe the world's finally ready to listen. A soft knock came at the door. It was Michael Harrington, the chairman. His tone was warm but businesslike. Naomi, I just came from a meeting with the FAA. They're interested in making parts of Project Horizon a national standard. Naomi blinked. A national standard. Michael nodded. They want to name it after you, the Carter model. Naomi laughed softly, shaking her head. No, not my name. Call it something bigger than me. Call it the Horizon Standard, because this was never just about one person. Michael smiled. I should have known you'd say that. When he left, Elena turned to Naomi. The Horizon Standard, that's perfect. Naomi's voice was quiet but firm. The horizon isn't an ending, it's a direction. That's all I ever wanted to give people. As the night deepened, Naomi finally shut down her computer. She walked slowly toward the elevator, her heels echoing against the marble floor. She thought about Flight 217, about how something so painful had become something so powerful. Before the doors closed, she looked out one last time at the glowing skyline. Maybe that's what change looks like, she whispered. Messy at first, but worth every second. The elevator doors slid shut, carrying her downward, and somewhere above, a plane crossed the moonlit sky, its engines steady, its path clear. The morning air at San Francisco International Airport was cool and clear. Sunlight streamed through the wide glass panels, reflecting off the wings of aircraft waiting quietly at the gates. Travelers moved briskly through the terminal, coffee cups in hand, suitcases rolling behind them like familiar companions. But there was a different energy today, subtle, hopeful, like the start of something new. Dr. Naomi Carter stood near gate 28, hands folded loosely in front of her. She wasn't there as the CEO of Aria Air this morning. She was there simply as Naomi, a woman watching her airline take off into a better future. Flight 401 to New York was boarding. It was the first route operating fully under the Horizon Standard, now adopted across the company and soon to be modeled nationwide. Every attendant, every pilot, every gate agent had completed empathy and inclusivity training. Naomi wanted to see, with her own eyes, what that looked like in motion. Sophie Alvarez spotted her from across the gate. Dressed in her new lead instructor uniform, she smiled broadly and walked over, her steps confident. Dr. Carter, you made it, Sophie said, her voice bright. Naomi smiled. Of course, wouldn't miss this for the world. Sophie laughed. You know, they still talk about Flight 217 in the crew lounge, but now they call it the day everything changed. Naomi nodded slowly. Sometimes change starts with a single, painful spark. Sophie's eyes softened, and sometimes it turns into light. Nearby, a young gate agent was helping an elderly man who had difficulty walking. Naomi watched as the agent crouched down to adjust his seatbelt gently and smiled, speaking with patience and care. It was a small thing, but it struck Naomi deeply. She realized that these quiet, everyday acts of kindness were the real markers of success. A voice over the intercom called for final boarding. Sophie straightened her jacket. "Would you like to join us for pre-flight?" Naomi shook her head. "No, this one's yours. I just wanted to see you off." Sophie smiled, eyes glistening. "You know, you changed my life." Naomi placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You changed mine first." As the plane began to board, Naomi stood back, watching families, business travelers, and solo adventurers step through the gate. No one looked anxious or uncertain. There was a sense of calm, an unspoken trust. That was new. Elena Brooks approached, holding 2 coffees. She handed one to Naomi. "I knew you'd be here," she said, smiling. Naomi accepted the cup, inhaling the familiar scent. "You know me too well." Elena glanced toward the jet bridge. "I heard you turned down the president's invitation to the aviation summit next month." Naomi nodded. "I don't want to stand on another stage. I want to keep building from here." Elena smirked. "You realize most people would kill for that kind of spotlight, right?" Naomi laughed softly. "Maybe that's why they shouldn't have it. Change isn't built in speeches. It's built in systems and in people like Sophie." Elena raised her cup in a small salute. "To the people who make it work." They clinked their paper cups together, a quiet toast amid the noise of the airport. A few minutes later, as the plane taxied out onto the runway, Naomi and Elena stood by the window. The engines roared to life, and the aircraft began to move. It was a powerful sight, not just a machine of metal and fuel, but a symbol of everything they had endured and rebuilt. When the plane lifted gracefully into the sky, Naomi whispered, "Every flight is a promise, and today we kept ours." Elena glanced at her. "You think it's really over now?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Change is never over, but now it's airborne." That evening, Naomi returned to her office for the last time that week. The city glowed outside her window, a sea of lights stretching endlessly across the bay. She sat at her desk, reflecting on how far they had come from humiliation and injustice to transformation and hope. Her computer pinged with a new email notification. The subject line read, "Thank you for saving my daughter's dream." She opened it. It was from the mother of a young woman named Grace, a recent Aviation Academy graduate who had been inspired by Naomi's story to apply to Aurea Air. "Dear Dr. Carter, Grace used to doubt herself. She thought she'd never fit in. But after watching your story, she believed again. She's now training to become a pilot. Thank you for proving that skies are for everyone." Naomi smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. She replied, "Tell Grace the sky has no favorites. It welcomes those who dare to rise." The door creaked open. It was Michael Harrington. He stepped in quietly, holding a small wooden box. "Thought you might want this," he said, placing it on her desk. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Something from Flight 217, Michael said. The torn ticket. We found the pieces and restored it." Naomi opened the box slowly. Inside, beneath a layer of soft fabric, lay the ticket repaired, framed behind glass, the edges still faintly visible where it had been torn. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Her eyes shimmered with the weight of everything that memory carried. Michael said softly, "It felt right to keep it, not as a reminder of what happened, but of what followed." Naomi smiled through a quiet exhale. "Thank you, Michael. I'll treasure it." After he left, She placed the frame on her desk. The paper wasn't perfect. It bore the marks of its past, but that was precisely why it mattered. Imperfection told the truth better than perfection ever could. As the night deepened, Naomi walked to the window again. Planes rose and fell against the horizon, each one tracing its path through the dark sky. She thought of everyone who had been part of the journey: Sophie, Elena, Heather, Michael, and the countless others who had found their own voices in the aftermath of that single moment. Her phone buzzed once more. It was a message from Sophie, sent from 30,000 feet above ground. "We just landed safely in New York. Smooth flight, happy passengers, perfect crew. This one's for you, Dr. Carter." Naomi smiled, her heart full. She typed back, "No, Sophie. This one's for us." She put her phone down, her reflection blending with the city lights on the glass. In that reflection, she saw not just a CEO, but a survivor, a leader, a woman who had turned pain into purpose. For the first time in weeks, she let herself simply breathe slow, steady, content. Outside, the city hummed softly, alive with stories. Somewhere, another plane ascended into the night sky, its lights tracing a path toward dawn. And as Naomi Carter watched it disappear into the horizon, she knew this wasn't an ending. It was flight constant, rising, infinite. Dr. Naomi Carter's story reminds us that true strength isn't about dominance, it's about grace under pressure. In a world that often confuses loudness with power, Naomi showed that quiet dignity can be louder than any outburst. Her calm didn't just expose injustice, it redefined leadership. When faced with discrimination, humiliation, or doubt, we all have a choice to react or to respond. Reaction burns fast, it satisfies the moment, but solves nothing. Response, however, is rooted in control, purpose, and integrity. Naomi's choice to stay composed didn't just protect her, it transformed everyone watching. It turned pain into progress. Her story also teaches that one person's courage can awaken an entire system. By refusing to mirror hate, she forced the world to see its reflection and to change it. Whether you're young or old, lead in a company or lead in a family, the lesson is the same. The way you carry yourself in your hardest moments defines who you truly are. So, the next time life tries to take your seat, stand tall, not loud, speak truth, not anger, because sometimes calm is the most revolutionary thing you can be.